Critics Podcast.
Armchair Critics Podcast.
Members of the notorious Armchair Critics Podcast have been arrested for having too many opinions.
Armchair Critics Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Armchair Critics Podcast. I'm your host, Aidan Howe.
And I'm your host, Ethan Engert.
And today we'll be discussing Edgar Wright's 2004 horror comedy film, Shaun of the Dead. Now, I love this movie. I've seen it, I think, 5 times at this point. It's part of kind of a thematic trilogy that Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg created together called the Three Flavors Cornetto Trilogy. The 3 films are unconnected in continuity, but feature similar themes, plots, and characters throughout the 3. And I love all of them. They're incredibly rewatchable for comedies. They're just absolutely fantastic films. So, as I said, I've watched this movie many times, but Ethan, this is your first time watching it. So please tell us, what did you think of Shaun of the Dead?
All right. I wrote, Edgar Wright is at the top of his game when he's behind the camera. Shaun of the Dead is cleverly written and certainly funny, but its most extraordinary achievements come from the directing and editing.
Mm-hmm.
More could have been done with the narrative, but it's not necessary, as this film already has everything it needs to be entertaining and compelling. I watched this film for the first time today, actually, moments ago, and I was very entertained. There's not a moment that I would call dull. This is a very, it's a very entertaining movie in many ways. Like I said, this is not the most complex narrative, but it does not need to be. Everything that's on the table is good, at least, sometimes great, and it was very fun. And I would recommend this to anyone.
I'd absolutely agree. Like you said, I think the directing is by far the best part of this overall. Edgar Wright, you can just see his talent coming out, even though this is his first legitimate movie. He made one movie before this that was a Western parody, but it was on a budget of $200,000 or the equivalent thereof, and nobody saw it, so I don't know if that counts.
Every director's got that one.
Yeah. This movie kind of came out of nowhere because he started his career by doing a sitcom with Simon Pegg, and I can't remember her name, but the actress that played Yvonne was the other lead in it, and it was called Spaced. And it only ran for a season, because it's a British show, and they always have really short runs for some reason, or really long runs. And there's this one episode where Simon Pegg's character gets high on mescaline and starts playing Resident Evil. And he hallucinates that he's in a house full of zombies, and he starts killing them with a rifle. And they basically looked at that, and they went, what if we made a zombie movie? And it completely launched Edgar Wright's career, who's now a major director. And that's really, really funny to me. The style is very unique in a lot of ways, and I think most notably it complements the movie perfectly. It's sort of like a demented cross between Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson in a way. It's very...
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call.
It's very choreographed, Everything is edited like a music video. It's a very musical movie, and you can especially see that in the scene where they, by the way, spoilers, as usual, please watch Shaun of the Dead before listening to this. The scene where they beat the bartender to death to Stop Me Now by Queen.
That's one of the funniest scenes in the movie.
It's so funny, and it's perfect. It's just perfect editing. I think I listened to a bit of the commentary. I didn't listen to the whole thing because I don't have that kind of attention span. But Simon Pegg was basically talking about how the movie was kind of inspired by sort of suit up scenes in action movies, there's that one in Commando with Arnold Schwarzenegger that's very famous where does a quick zoom on his jacket as he's strapping it up, does a quick zoom on his knife as he's sliding it into his sheath. But for visual comedy, they applied that to extremely boring scenes. So the most tightly stylistically edited scenes are the ones where they're doing the most boring stuff, like Shaun taking a pee, spreading jam on his toast, and brushing his teeth is edited like the most climactic scene in another movie.
with crazy sound design too. It's just like boom, boom, boom.
Really over the top sound design. Yeah, I think the use of sound and music throughout is very, very exacting. One thing I noticed this time about the usage of music is that there's this kind of like eerie, menacing music throughout. You know, very sort of an old timey zombie movie score. Lots of like eerie synth and whatnot. But it is just as present, maybe more so, in the initial scenes where he's just, like, hashing out little personal dramas that don't really matter that much in the plot, as it is in the scenes with actual zombies. You know?
Yeah.
Like, even the first scene, like, he's so kind of wrapped up in his own world, and this is what really, really interests me about the first act. It's all from Shaun's perception, and he's so wrapped up in his world that, like, everything is sort of played out like a movie before him. Like, when he interacts with people, it's like a jump scare, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yvonne meets him as he's walking down the street, and it's like, you know, the eerie music as he's starting to notice, hey, you know, something's going wrong, and then, like, blamp! And she pops up and just, like, says hi. It's really
I did get scared more in his interactions with people than any single zombie moment. Yeah, you mentioned, this is kind of like a cross between Tarantino and Wes Anderson. And it's funny, doing this right after Heat a little bit, that these are both kind of, to an extent, like parodies on these very, you know, overdramatic, kind of, you know, older films in the genres that they were. Definitely Shaun of the Dead more so than Heat. And it's at some moments, it was like, crazy enough that I wondered, I was like, is Edgar Wright gonna like reveal to us that this is a dream at the end or something? Like, but that's just the way that he directs. It's very crazy, yet like the editing, lots of quick cuts, and the sound design. I was noticing like everything about it is just like somebody like picking up an everyday item is a noise that, you know, somebody created in a studio and then made twice the volume it ought to be. But it's wonderful. And I can't imagine what it would be like Edgar Wright coming on the scene for the first time with this in 2004. You know, I've seen, I kind of eased my way into him. I watched Baby Driver first, which is not his most crazy film in terms of technique.
It is a unique film, but you know, it still feels like a standard movie in many ways. Yeah. Part of the reason it was so fun was the directing and editing. I was constantly like drawn in and surprised every moment. The surprises never wore off, even though they were done multiple times sometimes. And it was fun. That's a great word to describe this movie. Fun movie. Absolutely. And one of the interesting things about it is that kind of tightness in the choreography, in everything going on, it extends into the script writing, not just into the directing and editing itself. So these movies, the Cornetto films, all three of them, World's End is my favorite, Shaun of the Dead is fantastic. All three of them have this almost absurd intricacy with setups in the script. Occam's razor is used to full effect here, to the point it extends into the realm of absurdity how many setups there are. And like every single time I watch one of these movies, and I think I have seen all of them at least 5 times now, every single time I watch one of these movies, I notice new details and new setups. So I noted a few of them. So there are some that are fairly obvious, like the 2 long takes of Shaun going to the shop. The first one where everything's normal, and the second one where everything's like collapsing around him, and he's so wrapped up in his own thoughts that he doesn't notice. But there's all these little references and stuff. But some of the stuff I found online, a lot of it I just noticed myself. The first time he goes to the shop, he gets a standard Coke. Second time, he's decided to sort his life out and get back with Liz, so he gets a Diet Coke. When the shopkeeper comes back at him as a zombie, he's holding his hand out, demanding the change that Shaun owes him, kind of, you know, showing how zombies still keep their primal instincts. Pete tells Ed to go live in the shed at one point early in the movie, which obviously he does at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just all these great little setups, all these great little callbacks, and it all comes together in the final act, where just like everything that you've seen sort of stated thus far is paid off.
Yep. Yeah. That was something that I really enjoyed. In that this film is very obvious with the things that it does, and which is like always kind of rule number one, when you're making any form of narrative art, that you want your stuff to be like, as your ideas and themes, just whatever you're doing, to be as veiled as possible without being invisible. Unless you're doing satire, which this is, and it just like hits you over the head with all this stuff, and there's just Shaun's girlfriend breaks up with him, and Ed's just like, I'm not going to give you any of the cliches, but at least it's not the end of the world. It's just like, okay. Yeah, well.
Zombie hits the window.
Right. But that was something that I really enjoyed about the first half, or the first act, I mean. There was like this, for me, there's like this tension and suspense going, because all I know is that this is, Edgar Wright comedy about zombies. And so I'm waiting for the zombies, and they keep, there's that, I think of that specific scene where Shaun's at his job. He works at like this electrical, they sell
like TVs and
stuff. Yeah, stuff. And so he's flipping through the news channels, and archers are coming through, and it's the zoom, and with something's about to happen, and then boom, it's just like your stepfather's here,
Yeah.
And that keeps happening over and over again. Like something is about to be revealed. He sees he's on the bus, and there's all the coughing, and I'm just like, come on, just give it to me. It's tension, it's suspense.
It is legitimately suspenseful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was really cool. It's, again, very fun, but it was super cool that Edgar Wright can do a lot with this film outside of the genre of just comedy, which is why I think this film excels to a level that many genre pieces can't. It's because there are so many genres in this, and they are all done very well.
I think what's interesting, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. And I think what's interesting about parodies, right? In order to do a good parody, you have to have legitimate respect and understanding for what you're parodying. And you have to be able to, like, I'd say that's the number one thing is respect,
Mm-hmm.
Like, Edgar Wright made a parody of films like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, obviously, that whole golden age of zombie movies. But it's not because he hates those movies, it's because he loves them. And he has clearly very carefully studied these films and examined what makes them work. And he's effortlessly mixed legitimate horror and legitimate drama into the comedic veneer of this film.
Yeah, yeah.
Like you said, it is very surprisingly suspenseful at times. The final act is extremely dark in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's like these in zombie movies, you've always got the main characters, right, who survive, but they always encounter like, oh, here's this survivor of this one other group, and he's like, yeah, the zombies, they're very dangerous. They killed all my friends. And like Shaun and Liz are those survivors. It's like, this is their story. This is the people who are at the peripherals of any other zombie movie. And you could even argue that like Yvonne and her group are supposed to be like the main characters, and that Shaun, Ed, and Liz are just kind of these poor schmucks who are like on the edges of it.
Right. Yeah.
Every aspect of it is played out well. The horror is done perfectly. Again, all the little reveals like kind of play in well, and this is a movie that rewards vigilance, because the more you look, the more you realize things are wrong. Sometimes, oftentimes it's very in your face. Like when he's looking at the when he's at the corner store and he's like looking at the newspapers and he's like, oh man, something's clearly wrong here. But also, like, you can periodically just see like bodies in the background, or you can just hear like sirens going off or whatever. See people, like you said, coughing on the bus. Yeah. But at the same time, you know, it's sort of got this thing going on where not that much has changed. I think it's kind of a reflection on how crappy living in Britain is.
That's the real theme.
You've got all these pale, kind of like deadpan, miserable people just sort of sleepwalking through their lives, including and especially Shaun, you know?
Yeah, right.
That's why it's so difficult initially to tell who's a zombie and who's not, because there's like practically no difference between them. And then at the very end, you can see that reflected as well, because a lot of zombies are literally just able to go back to their old jobs because they can be like cleaned up and just their primal instincts take over and they keep doing the same deal. So I think thematically, so this isn't necessarily a super dense movie thematically, but it does have some themes going on, which I find interesting. And I think most of all, it's sort of a skewering of apathy. You know, Shaun is a very apathetic character, and he sort of is jolted out of his apathy very, very gradually. I can sort of relate to this, you know, and you might be able to. But just kind of sleepwalking through life, you know, sort of ignoring problems, being kind of generally miserable and feeling like, hey, you know, nothing kind of matters until finally your problems actually catch up with you and you're like, bam, all right, I have to deal with this now. And for him, it all happens on one day, you know? Right. It's like, it's one day where he has to like go talk to his mom and like get his girlfriend back. And that's right when the zombies attack, and he finally realizes, all right, this is a problem that I need to address.
Yeah. I thought that was really cool. That's a kind of a trope in cinema that I really love to see exaggerated, I guess, when the external conflict reflects the internal conflict, which is just something you should always do. But I really enjoy seeing that, like, exaggerated, like this, where, like you said, it all breaks at the same time, you know, these things that have been building. And the external conflict of this zombie apocalypse allows him to deal with his internal conflict. You know, they say there are kind of like 3 levers you can pull when creating a character arc. You can have them become more likable, competent, or proactive. Shaun is kind of all of those in this film, but definitely more of like the proactive one. I think that's the biggest arc that he has. And you see, like, as he's, like you were saying, he's not doing anything except just like he goes to his job and he sleepwalks through his whole life, and something comes up and he deals with that moment, or he doesn't if it's impossible to deal with it that moment. Yeah. But you see, like, throughout his encounters with the zombies, he has to plan. He makes up all these plans. That's kind of a recurring joke, but it's true that it's helping him become more proactive. And, you know, at the end, it's cliche because it's a parody, but in a good way, where he gets the girl because he has been able to, you know, overcome this internal conflict and the external conflict. And they complement, and they complement each other very well. Beyond just that, but yeah, like the ideas of the external conflict being zombies. You know, the original theme of Dawn of the Dead was just like deeper than this, where it's just like, you know, wake up America, you're zombies just going to your minimum wage jobs or your whatever jobs, and like, just, you know, not
consumerism. I think was sort of the theme of the original Dawn of the Dead, as reflected in the fact that like all of the zombies kind of flock to the mall once they've been
right. Yep, that's what I was to say exactly. And it's like it's the same thing. It's very cool that it comes, the external conflict comes in this form that does have something to do on a thematic level with what Shaun is struggling with internally.
Absolutely. What do you think was your favorite scene?
So I was thinking about that, and I have two. The moment where they are beating up the bartender, like we mentioned, somehow, yeah, there's like this line earlier where the jukebox just like randomly plays music. And so they're fighting for their lives against this bartender. And all of a sudden Queen starts playing Don't Stop Me Now. And so they grab these pool cues and they're beating him to the beat of the song. And they're just like trading, like one person has 1 and 3 and someone else has 2 and 4. Very funny. I love that. And then the other one was the moment, where Shaun's got his crew and Yvonne has her crew, and they meet up one time. And Yvonne's crew is just exactly Shaun's crew as well. And they pass each other at the end of the encounter, and like each person who looks exactly the same like greets the other in the exact same way. That's hilarious.
It's really, really funny. Yeah, and that's another example of the choreography being ridiculous.
Yeah.
My favorite scene, I think it's difficult to pick out one. I really, really like the scene where they're kind of in the bar and then coming home right after Liz breaks up with Shaun. And there's just so many little, like, you can see everything's collapsing around them, but they don't notice because they're drunk, you know? Like, you've got the two people outside who appear to be making out, and then, like, right as they turn away and start walking away, like, the guy's head peels off.
Yeah.
Really gnarly. Or just a fantastic bit of comedy. The zombie they run across who's moaning, and they assume that he's, like, trying to sing along with them. And they're like,
all right.
It's just perfect.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic scene. And then the full scene, and again, it's really hard to pick out a favorite scene for me because I just like the first half especially, I just love watching. Yeah. But where they first encounter the two zombies in the garden is chilling enough to like get you interested, but just mainly really, really funny.
Right.
You know? Like they encounter this girl and they assume she's drunk, and then they encounter the guy, and the only thing they can think of to deal with them is to throw vinyl records at them, because that's the only thing that seems to have any effect.
Yeah.
That's another thing I love about this movie is how just awkward the combat is the entire time. And you can especially see that in the bar scenes. Like, you know, they start beating the bartender with the pool cues, you know, and that has almost no effect. And they try a bunch of different things. They throw darts at him, one of which hits Shaun. They attack him with a fire extinguisher and spray it all over his face. And eventually the only thing they can do is like smash his head through the jukebox.
Right.
It's hilarious. And like, you know, in the finale, they're like trying to use the rifle, but they can't get the ammo because everything's on fire. They're like trying to hold zombies off with like coat racks, you know?
Right.
It just feels very like impromptu and very kind of clumsy in a way that you really only see in British comedy and kind of cringe comedy, is just kind of things going wrong like this.
Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's sort of choreographed with kind of Edgar Wright's unique flair, which makes it even funnier in a way. Yeah.
You mentioned loving the first half. Act 1 for me was overall not a scene, but that's my favorite stretch of the film. Everything in that moment, aside probably the conflict, was amped up all the way. That's when the edits were the craziest, and you had some of the densest amounts of comedy. But I don't know if this is a thing or just me, but I love good exposition so much that the first act of many films is my favorite. but the exposition in this was fantastic.
It's just amazing.
The very first opening scene was amazing. You are delivered just about everything you need to know about the film. You learn about Shaun's living situation, his relationship with his girlfriends. In that scene, you learn about all the 5 main characters you're going to follow throughout the film, and that whole part where you have those like jump scares. Each new piece of information is revealed to like this jump scare, and everything is like tightly wound and very tied together in those moments where you have the fantastic directing, the hilarious writing, and the very tight exposition coming through simultaneously in each scene. That would be my favorite section of the film overall.
It's a great way to put it. I think this is a film, so it's a movie where a lot of things came together in good ways, you know.
Yeah.
And it's got sort of that lightning strike aspect of like just general quality that you don't often see in sort of first films, you know.
Yeah.
A big part of it, performances. You can see why Simon Pegg became like a big actor and started being in, you know, Mission Impossible and all that kind of stuff after this movie. Because he is amazing. He is really, really, really good. He's perfect in the comedic parts. You know, his apathetic, just like blank face, especially in like the first scene or like right after they kill the zombies and they're just like sitting on the couch drinking tea. Hilarious. Perfect for the film. Although he's also able to show incredible emotion, especially in the last act, where he gives like he legitimately shows his dramatic chops. He's simultaneously like, you know, it's a little bit kind of sad and pathetic to witness the way he just kind of breaks down, but you also really, really feel for him. And, you know, you start to think like, would I be any different in this situation? You know?
Right.
He's just fantastic throughout. And his chemistry with Nick Frost is amazing. It's sort of to be expected because, you know, they were real life friends for years, but they're just great together. Their banter is really fun to witness. Their interactions are always fun to witness. Nick Frost as Ed is just hysterical, and you feel like you're watching an actual friendship that's been going on for years develop, you know? The way they wail on each other, the way they occasionally like yell at each other or like freak out or have falling outs and then like make it up, you know, it's amazing.
Yeah. Ed was probably my favorite character in the film. He just, I'm thinking of the scene where he wants to drive Shaun's stepfather's Jaguar so bad he just crashes the car.
Looks like we're gonna have to take the Jag.
He's a goofball.
I really like his relationship with Shaun, particularly how Shaun just kind of gets increasingly frustrated with him as the movie goes on. You know, like when they're right outside the pub and they're trying to break in, and Ed just like gets a call from his buddy who wants to buy weed. And he like sits down and just starts taking the call, even though they're in mortal danger. And Shaun just flips out and is like, you know, I finally had enough. I'm not covering for you anymore. This is it. And up to that point, Ed had been sort of an annoyance. I mean, he's an absolutely hilarious character, and Nick Frost is incredibly likable. But you can see why Shaun is starting to get really annoyed with him, you know? He doesn't really contribute anything of value. He's just kind of being a burden, especially when, like, Shaun is fighting off that one zombie and Ed and Dylan just kind of hang back. But in the very end, Ed redeems himself because he literally sacrifices himself so Shaun and Liz can escape. You know? And it's just like, it's a perfect little ending to his character arc. It's not incredibly deep, but I think it just plays out really well. And it, you know, for kind of his reward, he's able to like eternally just continue to hang out with Shaun and play video games, which is exactly what he wanted to do.
Yeah. That's one thing that is super cool about this movie. And I mentioned briefly earlier that this kind of transcends genre in a way, not because it's genreless, because it has so many genres. And so I'm thinking, like, you might argue that primarily this is comedy, but you would have to construct an argument for that because there are other things that have very strong importance to this film. And I think of The Anchorman by Adam McKay. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite comedies of all time. I think it's funnier than this, but I think I enjoy Shaun of the Dead more than The Anchorman because it can do more than just comedy. And you know the bits like you were talking about with Ed earlier on in the movie would just be kind of a throwaway punchline or something. But this moment where he gets called by this guy who wants some weed is funny, but it turns into something more. You see Shaun become a more proactive, more mature person by denouncing the things that he would have condoned earlier in the film. And that's just, I think that's what you have to do if you're going to make a very good film. It has to transcend the things that come before it. Mm-hmm. And especially with, this being a parody, it's very cool to see it be of the things it comes from, but not like it to the extent that it is. It ends up being better.
I'd agree. I think it does end up being better in many ways. Fun fact, Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright were actually able to have cameos as zombies in George Romero's next movie. I think Land of the Dead, it was called, which came out in 2006. Because Romero saw this movie and he loved it so much. Wow, that's super cool. Yeah, it's awesome. I forget who it was. I don't think it was Howard Hawks. It was some famous director said that to write a comedy, you just have to write a drama and then add funny parts. And that's I think that really applies to this movie because I feel like I'm starting to repeat myself here, but it's got that basic dramatic structure. It's got that it's got the internal and external journey sort of reflected in each other, like you said, and there's just comedic bits added, comedic lines added, and it plays off and it all combines cohesively and just creates a really fun experience overall.
Yeah. One thing that I noticed, I really enjoy seeing films break rules, but also follow some good ones and just hit key points in the unique way that only that film can. Yeah. One reason that I really like Nolan films is that he has sometimes bloated, but still in a way some tight scripts in that they follow like Blake Snyder's Beat Sheet, Save the Cat, pretty tightly with these classic archetypal narrative arcs. And I really enjoyed that about Shaun of the Dead. I said earlier, it's not the most, there could have been more added, but it doesn't need to. And it's, it knows what the strengths of storytelling are, and it just hits those key beats, not in a cliche way, because it's done uniquely in a way that, not every film can have the resolution be going to see your best friend who's a zombie locked up in your shed and play video games with him, It's very fun to see a film do these things in that unique way, and Edgar Wright pays it off here.
Absolutely. I think the thing you were saying about the simplistic narrative, I think that's absolutely true. One of the most important things in low budget, obviously, this isn't super low budget, but it's like a $5 million budget. It's not a big budget movie. One of the most important things to have a fairly low budget movie work is understanding your constraints, Yeah. Don't start out trying to make the next big blockbuster if you have, a budget of $500,000. And Edgar Wright absolutely does that. Like, one thing I noticed, so, there are only like 3 or 4 locations in this film. It's not like a super, like, diverse range of locations, but it doesn't need to be. One thing I noticed about the cinematography is that it doesn't have a lot of, like, grand sweeping shots. It doesn't have a lot of shots of, like, big locations or whatever. In fact, there's only one that I can think of, and that's when they're in the backyard, like right outside the Winchester, and the camera like pans upward to reveal all the zombies that are like, outside. That's the only one, but it works perfectly for the tone, especially in the first act, because you're meant to feel kind of closed in. You're in these characters sort of like claustrophobic, sleepwalking worldviews as they just kind of wander around through life and don't think about anything greater than them or wider than them. So that's why you like don't really need wide angles or whatever. So again, that's just another example of just everything coming together well for the tone of the film and the low budget working for it instead of against it.
Yeah. I mean, who doesn't love seeing a director express themes and just overall concepts through their mise en scène? And Edgar Wright, one of the very first things that I wrote, one of the first notes I wrote, is that I feel that Wright has complete control of what happens in a scene. We only see exactly what he wants us to and when. And it's like I felt like he was holding my hand and like guiding me. Like, here's what I want you to notice. Look at this, specific detail. And then all of a sudden you just cut to a larger shot, or the camera pans, and there's a whole nother layer to it. I'm thinking of, again, that opening scene where it starts as just Shaun speaking with his girlfriend, and then they mention Ed, and he's there, and then they mention his girlfriend's roommates, and they're there, and it's just like they were so cleverly concealed. It never even crossed my mind that there would be anybody there. Edgar Wright is so genius. He can do exactly what he wants to. This film is kind of exacting. It's pretty precise, and there's not a single moment where I felt like there was too much or too little. There was this perfect threshold that Edgar Wright maintains throughout the whole film, flawlessly.
The amount of control he's able to exact over it for such a low budget film is just astounding. And I think that kind of, there's sort of this obsessiveness that like motivates great directors. That's one common thread I found between them. Yeah. Occasionally you've got directors who feel a little more free to allow actors to kind of unwind and just be themselves, and that can work out well. And to a certain extent, you see that just with like the banter between Shaun and Ed. It's not exactly improvised, but it has an improvisational feel, But overall, it's just super exacting. And like, even though they work in super, super different kind of genres and styles, this is a thread that Edgar Wright has in common with like Alfred Hitchcock and David Fincher and Wes Anderson and all these other great directors who just have a very clear vision in mind, and they work exactly towards what they want it to be with every single aspect of the movie.
Yeah. And it's very cool to see Edgar Wright has a style. He has idiosyncrasies that he is obviously aware of, and he just makes his film centered around that. This would be a very different film in the hands of even Wes Anderson, who is a very similar MO. But Edgar Wright like makes the film that he can make. He has ideas, and they just they're expressed in a very unique way. And that's one thing that you have to appreciate when there's a director who you can know the name of. They're unique enough that they have their own style, rather than just like somebody who puts out a bunch of movies in a genre, or just some Marvel directors who I could never know the name of because they're either bogged down by a studio or just doing these arbitrary, obligatory, things in their films that they feel that they need to. But Edgar Wright, he has a style, and he knows what he wants to do, and he's bold enough to do it. And when it's something this unique, I really cannot think of a movie like this at all, or really any movie like any one of Edgar Wright's films. It's refreshing. All right, everybody. That concludes our episode on Shaun of the Dead. Thank you for listening. Next week, we will be watching Scarface. And we have finally completed all of our socials that we're on. Our Twitter's up like last week. We have an Instagram now, at Armchair Critics Podcast. DM us on either. Let us know your thoughts, or you can email us at armchaircriticspodcast@gmail.com. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. Have a good week.